Hello and welcome to episode 100 of Crypt. Oh my God, I am here. This was my goal. I've come in, day out, and I've just been screaming at my phone, talking to y'all, and goddamn, I appreciate it. So just straight from my heart, thanks for anyone that's given this a watch. I wanted to take a little moment today. Rather than doing my usual recap, I wanted to touch on a variety of projects that are building things that I believe are very useful to the future. There is a lot of utility inside the blockchain space. It is not just pump and dumps. It is not just meme coin trading. It is not just hodl on these digital assets. There are real world applications that are near and dear to my heart. Let's get into that. So when you think of blockchain, when you think of crypto, what comes to mind generally are the assets themselves, the tokens. But guess what? The tokens are a way to align incentives. The idea is that we're going to have a distributed network. Distributed networks require hardware, they require alignment, they require updating of software, they require active participation. And the idea is that the tokens provide that alignment, that economic upside to keep people logging in every day and maintaining the network's uptime. That's it. Now let's talk about one of the biggest goddamn networks out there, the fucking internet. I'm not just talking about the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is what you log into when you type www into a browser. I'm talking the internet itself, the series of cables that run under the oceans, that run across the land, and that connect everybody, the entire globe, so that they can access that beautiful thing we call the World Wide Web. That is something that is owned by internet service providers, the ISPs. It literally comes out of the ground, and in order to get it to your house, you've got to pay somebody a hefty fee. And guess what? That stuff, it's all pretty old, and when something new and novel like fiber comes out to upgrade it, it's a very heavy lift. They literally need to dig holes in the earth in order to insert the appropriate structure that is required to run this. Of course, we can see it's very problematic now that we have, in times of conflict, nations going out to the bottom of the ocean in submarines, and they're actually cutting the goddamn wires. So the internet itself is one of the earliest of these networks. And guess what? Blockchain's got its eye on it. I introduce to you Double Zero. This is coming out of the Solana ecosystem. And what Double Zero is, just imagine two zeros for a second. Let's get literal with their name, because what they are looking at is a decentralized sort of parallel to the internet itself. They consider it the inner ring and the outer ring. Now, one thing to understand with Solana is much larger data centers than something like Ethereum, than Bitcoin, for example. Bitcoin, the miners are pretty big. Anytime you see a big data center, that's the miners. But guess what? Bitcoin is actually run by the nodes. The nodes go out and they verify all the transactions, and they send that back to a miner to lock that into a block. Now, in Ethereum, the whole concept is that we want this globally distributed network, and people need to operate it from a small, light, cheap, and easy to maintain node at home. The idea in both Bitcoin and Ethereum is that you can run a node in your house, you can verify the network, you can contribute to the block development, and you can plug in your money directly into the chain itself. Most people are used to sending assets through their wallet, which is actually a connection to somebody else's node somewhere else. It's called an RPC. However, you could bypass that and you can just talk to these networks directly from your home. And guess what? Nobody can stop you from spending your money the way you want to in these situations if you run a node. Now, Solana went and they said, hey, the nodes limit the speed. They limit the price, right? They cause it to be a little bit slower, a little bit more expensive, because you're paying for the global access to these networks. Solana is larger data centers, and as a result, they're a little more centralized. They've been working on that. I don't want to get into that debate, but it does mean that with these larger data centers, with more compute, you get what you see from Solana. You get a fast, cheap user interface. And they're expanding that, because with the Solana node sets, these data centers, the closer they are to each other, the faster it gets. You've heard of like high frequency traders kind of knocking down entire mountains in order to get a line of sight between lasers so that they could cull down milliseconds on their trades. Same thing is going on with blockchain. And when we look at what's going on with Solana and their data centers, well, Double Zero kind of took the idea and said, why can't we do that to the actual internet itself? And for fuck's sake, they're redesigning the internet. Like, how cool is that? So look, I don't want to get too far into this. It's just one project, but here's the idea. You have the inner ring and the outer ring. The inner ring is basically reproducing a blockchain network, but they want to do it for the data packets that are transferred over the internet itself, for the greater World Wide Web. And the idea is that they host these nodes and they have these bandwidth systems and these routing systems. And this is a series or a mesh network of computer operators that provide a smaller, more localized access to the internet itself. So instead of using your local ISP, your big telcos, you can hop on to the 00 network, access the World Wide Web, and get a ton of data. Now, their outer ring is basically a connection to the public internet. So if something goes wrong on the inner ring, your little decentralized access to the World Wide Web, well, they can always push you out to the public network that exists. Obviously, that is more of a security trade-off, and they do manage sort of that bridge in between the two. So it is kind of interesting. There is hardware being run to filter the data and speed up the transaction process. And of course, they don't want DDoS attacks, right? They just don't want packets being distributed so heavily that their machines are dealing with false information to the point that they can't handle the real info. But this is so cool. When we get into a world of AI agents, they are going to want to move value and information in the same way blockchain does. Let's keep in mind, blockchain treats value the same way the internet treats data. That's what this is all about, the destruction of the idea of money, revamping it to a new digital medium where it can coexist with applications the way we're used to doing with data itself. So 00 is really cool for me, and I actually want to take a quick pause because I did record this entire podcast yesterday, and guess what? The internet went down, and it wasn't the ISPs. It wasn't my connection. I still had upload download speeds, but it was the DNS. It was the routers. It was the throttling nodes. It was Cloudflare, Amazon Web Services, where these websites are stored. It was Google Cloud. All of these things were inaccessible. And right as I was recording this 00 piece, I lost access to the servers that are capturing and recording my video. So not only was I like pumped about what I was talking about, but it's self-actualized. If I had a different way to connect to the World Wide Web, I could have kept going. And yet, somehow, these major providers like Amazon, Google, Cloudflare, they just could not keep it up. And I was unable to ship yesterday. It's why I did not put out a podcast. So holy moly, we're seeing the reality taking shape in real time. Now, moving on, I really didn't expect to talk about Tron, but Tron is actually a fork of Ethereum. It sacrificed a lot of its security for faster transaction times, for lower costs. And well, the reason I bring it up is because Tron has become a stable coin bastion. It just ballooned. And why did this happen? Well, developing nations that are mobile forward, that leapfrogged over the laptop to places like Africa, places like Southeast Asia, where they operate basically their entire digital sphere from mobile. Well, they picked up Tron. And why did it become so big with stablecoins? Because they live in places where their money doesn't work, where it hyperinflates so insanely that you might lose money in between the time it takes you to get your paycheck for that week's work. And that's nuts. On the Tron blockchain, we found the reality of banking the unbanked. This is really one of blockchain's original goals. And while ideally they wanted to do it through Bitcoins, basically with a much bigger vision of a shift in hard money, the reality was Tron opened up the doors for people in developing worlds to begin to store their own wealth. And not only that, they were able to do it in the US dollar, the dominant currency of the world. And through cell phones, they could transact, they could buy and sell, they could move money, vendors could receive, people could buy good product. And you can take that wealth, you can hop onto Aave, and you can get a loan. These places with these hyperinflationary environments, their money is so fractured that the infrastructure that develops on top of good money never got built, meaning you can't take out a business loan to expand your business. You can't get into health insurance because why would you insure yourself in a fiat that is going to inflate away and become worthless? What is that policy going to do for you? So it's pretty wild to see that Tron, which originally started out pretty meh, and to be honest, it's not a chain that I love and adore, but it became the winningest chain for stablecoins, and it did succeed in banking the unbanked. This is no small feat, and it's truly fucking amazing. Moving on, we got to get into AI. This is the world that we live in now, and AI is big. It's here. It's very scary. It's taking over jobs. It's performing math better than our leading mathematical minds. I'm coming from the filmmaking space, and I'm now in chats with solo filmmakers that are producing entire rich narratives with really high-end production value. And they're doing it alone. And this is just nuts. Generally, to make a movie, it requires about 60 different unions to get involved, to build the set, to make the makeup, to feed the people, to do the lighting, to do the rigging, right? It goes on and on and on. And suddenly we have people doing it solo. But most importantly is our relationship with our personal AIs. Basically, when you talk to ChatGPT, that's what I'm talking about. And ChatGPT is obligated by the government to retain these profiles. Should they be requested from the government, they will hand over your user profile. This is the inferencing. This is the conversation that says, hey, ChatGPT, can you do XYZ for me and give me that answer back? Now, ChatGPT has announced historical memory, so the more you talk to it, the better it becomes. But in the end of the day, these AIs are going to know us better than we know ourselves. And that means they can slip all sorts of micro pushes into our life, adjusting the trajectory and the outcomes of what happens to us slowly, methodically, and repeatedly. This is the foundation of propaganda. According to Goebbels under the Nazi regime, truth is simply a lie that has been repeated long enough. So I cannot overstate how dangerous it is that as we develop these amazing tools with AI, we must protect that relationship between us, our information, and the rest of the world, whether it be private corporations that want to exploit it or bad actors that want to exploit the private corporations. So here is Atoma. They're on the SWE network, and they're building an open source AI cloud, basically building on that decentralized storage called Walrus. I've talked about it before. So if we do build these profiles, where are we going to hold them? One, we want them secured behind a cryptographic key that we hold the private keys to. That means that nobody can unpack it unless it's us with either our verifiable biometrics or our private key phrases. Now, beyond that, we also don't want it to be sitting in a honeypot for hackers to get. Maybe the chain gets exploited by quantum, but if that data is spread across a decentralized data storage network, they can only get bits and pieces, and it will require that unique private key to reassemble that data information. So this is all very important, and it is being worked on. Of course, we have Legrange. I already covered them, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but this comes back to the same core idea. AI, you can prove. This is so important to this world that we're moving into. We need to know that the data we see is true. This is the plot of the recent Mission Impossible movie. It's just an AI that gets into the data information systems and adjusts minor tweaks, and nobody can tell what's true and what's not. This morning, I saw a machine learning algorithm that can instantly remove really significant features from video. This is dangerous. We don't know what we're seeing. We don't know if it's true. We don't know if the person that we're talking to, the loved one on the other side of the phone or the video chat, is even a real human. I will tell you, people in crypto are getting that all the time from North Korea. My previous CEO hits me up all the time. First, it was texts. Now it's voice. Now I'll get into a Zoom call, and it's a literal North Korean agent with his face deep faked on top of theirs. So we need to know what's real and what's not, or society as we know it will unravel. This is like very, very, very important. And that needs to be secured by cryptographic proofs on a publicly verifiable blockchain. Now, as we dive further into that concept, we have Sam Altman, OpenAI, and their solution to human verifiability. Obviously, they went for blockchain because they're no dummies, but they have what is called WorldCoin. And WorldCoin is a very ambitious parallel to ChatGPT. It is basically a biometric scan. It uses your retina and a variety of information inside your eye to scan and produce a human profile hidden behind a cryptographic hash. You access it with the scan. You can, of course, import that and get the seed phrases so you can do it a little bit more from like, a mobile interface. But the onboarding process is through this very surreal metallic orb. And the idea here is to create a database of real humans. What they want to do is ultimately set up a universal basic income system so that humans can give their real true data to OpenAI and ChatGPT. Suffice it to say that as amazing as these AIs are, fake information does not help them grow. They need the truth in order to create the next wave of what AI is. You can actually see this very same threat happening with social media, where you have these pundits, these talking heads, points at self, just relaying other people's info. They start to get into an echo chamber, taking in data that came from another pundit or talking head and circulating these hallucinations. That's why you see such a hot mess in the news cycle on the internet. I always try to tell my dad Twitter's the shit, but it's also full of bullshit. And it takes a lot of diligence to suss out what is real and what isn't. We can put these all on chain and we can make a world that's more sincere. We also have human node, which is taking the human verifiability and trying to expand that to say each human acts as a node in our proof of stake network, and we can take that biometric verification and sort of extrapolate it to the broader subset of how we build decentralized networks. Really novel, really interesting idea. Of course, we've all seen Polymarket. This was so impactful in the last elections, and it's actually proving to be a very interesting tool. This is predictions markets. It's proving that we do get richer, more accurate data when people have skin in the game. In fact, before Israel bombed Iran last night, there have been buys coming in on the will it happen yes side. And this has recurred in a few things, leading sleuths to believe that there's actually somebody from the Israeli point of view with inside information that is using Polymarket to gain and accrue wealth. Now, sure, that might sound weird to you, but that also means that we get that information sourced from somebody with that greed. That greed is an alignment factor, and that predictions markets may be the single greatest source of truth that we can get. We've seen with exit polls are vastly different from the actual results because people will say something when confronted with society, but again, when skin's on the line, they may act a little differently. Now, of course, we're going into a very different world as we get to video games, but this is something really impactful. In full disclosure, I work with Off the Grid, our fund invested in them, and I was very deeply involved in putting them on the Avalanche blockchain. But what their goal is to create a robust, rich third-person battle royale shooter where all of the things that you earn, all of the gun skins, all of the limbs that are part of their tools, all of the aesthetics, the beards, the different features that you can get, they're captured as NFTs. And why would you want to do that? Well, they don't want the Steam store to suck up 30% of their trading revenue. Call of Duty has a secondary market that generates about $2 million a day in people trading gun skins. The problem is they don't own these gun skins. They can go from account to account, but the Call of Duty servers can simply revoke them at any point in time. Actually, why Ethereum was developed in the first place was because Vitalik spent about 100 hours earning a sword on World of Warcraft, and eventually the developer said, hey, that sword's too powerful, and they removed it. He felt as though those hours and hours of effort that he put in were all for naught, and Off the Grid is taking the first stab at, hey, you can get in here, you can play it. It's got great graphics, it's got amazing fighter flight, it's got Neil Blomkamp from Hollywood providing the storyline. It's free to play on PlayStation, Xbox, on PC, and you get in there and the things you earn, they stick with your account because that account is on chain. That means when you buy and sell these things, you can actually earn real money. And we're seeing it start to work as someone recently sold some of their April Fool's Day 8 masks for over $2,000. So this is a really interesting way of breaking through the walled gardens that are app stores. And this applies to Apple and Google and et cetera, et cetera. So we are just seeing applications across the board. Now, I did mention Avalanche, and they've gone hard into the real world assets. Real world assets are mostly US T-bills because they produce yield. They're very easy to digitize and to translate. But very recently, Avalanche came out with this $240 billion real estate is coming on chain with Balcony. And what this is the registration information for housing. If anyone's ever bought a house out there, you go to the housing registrar, you give them your papers, and there's an entire office full of humans just shuffling papers around. Like, why do I need them as a middleman? You could put this on chain and I could wrap this in an NFT. And when I sell my house, I could just send this to somebody peer to peer through a blockchain transaction. There's no need for these egregious middleman fees because you got to pay those people salaries. And yet they're only open from like 9 to 3, 10 to 3. They work these crazy hours. They're very difficult to interact with because really they provide a service that you need, but they don't really need to care if the customer service is great. So this is a step forward in the great digitization. And at the end of the day, as we move towards a singularity with AI, with VR, with AR, with haptic feedback, we are going to thin that veil between the digital world and the real world. Meat space and cyberspace are going to be as thin as the lens in my glasses. And you are going to be able to touch and sense and feel what happens in digital. You will be able to overlay it on top of the real world. We are going to blur the reality and the differences of these two spaces so significantly. And in order to do that and not break everything that we know about physics and the human psychology, we need to maintain some sort of history, some sort of truth. Value is a derivative of those two things. Money is just verifiably something that can only be spent once. And this is where blockchain comes into play. So as we march towards this new world, we need a truth layer, we need a verifiability layer, and it needs to be cryptographic, decentralized, anti-fragile to nation states, to corporations, and publicly verifiable. This is why blockchain exists and why we will continue to build. So with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in for 100 episodes. I mean, I just feel like I'm beginning to get in the rhythm. And with that being said, while this was my goal when I started out, it is only the beginning. It is not the end. From here on out, I'm just gearing up. So thank you so much. If you give me a watch, I mean, a follow would be endlessly appreciated. Any comment to know that you enjoy it warms my heart. Till then, stay safe. I know the markets are wild. We've got macro world news that's all over the place. So don't lever up. Buy, spot, and hold. And I will see you next week.